from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, President Trump deploys the National Guard to Washington and takes control of local police, despite the city experiencing a 30-year low in violent crime.
I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor.
The president today convening a news conference flanked by his top officials decrying what he says is an uptick in crime in the nation's capital, sending 800 National Guard troops to the streets and putting the city's police under federal authority. The facts on the ground about local crime and how officials are responding coming up. Plus, the president on his summit with Vladimir Putin following Ukrainian President Zelensky will begin the next meeting and pushing for a land swap between Russia and Ukraine. What we can expect from that Trump-Putin showdown just 4 days from now. Also, the deal between the U.S. government, Nvidia, and AMD. The company is agreeing to pay the U.S. 15% of their revenue from AI chip sales to China. And the developing news as we come to air. The tariff truce with Beijing now extended another 90 days. Just hours before it expired. That is where we start, with President Trump extending the tariff truce with China an additional 90 days as administration officials continue to negotiate with representatives from Beijing. That news coming after President Trump announced a negotiated deal with Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang, who you can see there on Bloomberg TV. That gives the U.S. government 15% of its revenues from AI chips sold in China. Chipmaker AMD struck a similar deal, and more could be coming. We kick things off with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick with tonight's power moves, live from world headquarters in New York. Romaine?
Yeah, it was an interesting announcement that came about 2:30 p.m. Wall Street time, Joe. Unfortunately, the market really kind of shrugged it off. You did see a very, very minor jump in stocks off of the lows of the day. They were already in the red, but that quickly faded. And in fact, they faded even deeper as we got closer to the close, down about 0.2% for the S&P 500. And a big part of the reason is really has nothing to do with Trump or trade. It really has to do with the economic data that's on tap, including the big CPI report tomorrow, where a lot of people are going to be looking through that report for any signs that there is some tariff pass-through. The idea that the companies that, of course, that are shouldering these tariff costs are maybe potentially passing them on to consumers. Whether that shows up in the report tomorrow remains to be seen, but that's a big part of the reason why you saw a little bit of stasis, Joe, when it comes to where equities moved. We should point out, too, that this was also a day where there was a big focus on the chip sector. Comments earlier today by President Trump with regards to the ability of Jensen Huang and Nvidia to sell its highest and most powerful chips to China. The news, of course, about the 15% that they would pay on any sales to China. And then, of course, that meeting that apparently just ended between the Intel CEO, Lip-Bu Tan, and the president there at the White House.
Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick. Romaine, thank you so much. From world headquarters in New York, and more on the China tariff truce extension, we turn to Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois. He's the ranking member of the House China Select Committee. Congressman, it's good to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm deeply curious to hear your thoughts on the Nvidia AMD agreements, but this 90-day extension, is this the right thing right now?
Well, I think it's yet another extension that causes more uncertainty about what's going to happen going forward. It hurts our small businesses. I've talked to businesses on the phone repeatedly who are pausing their hiring, pausing their investment, and basically, starting to lay people off because they don't know what the future holds. And so these infinite kind of extensions without any resolution, especially with the blanket tariffs, causes high prices, makes things unaffordable, and stalls economic growth.
Well, you go with another 90 days here, Congressman. Will that be enough time to generate a deal?
I don't know. I think that President Trump right now is trying to curry favor with Xi Jinping. He's trying to bring him to the negotiating table or do something, and we can't really tell what it is that's actually going on. But what we do know is that he's hiking tariffs in a blanket tariffs on our partners and friends and allies, driving them further away, even at the same time that we need their assistance in curbing economic aggression by the Chinese Communist Party in terms of its trade practices. And so I'm deeply concerned about the state of affairs right now.
Well, we know that China is going to be able to buy some high-end AI chips, not the highest, to be clear, the H20 chips from Nvidia and a similar component from AMD. What is new, however, is that the two companies I just mentioned, Nvidia and AMD, are going to be giving some of the proceeds to the U.S. government. President Trump earlier today talked about this negotiated deal with Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang that would give the 15% of revenues from China's AI chip sales. AMD apparently is going to be working under a similar arrangement. Listen to what President Trump said earlier.
I deal with Jensen, who's a great guy, and Nvidia. The chip that we're talking about, the H20, it's an old chip. I said, listen, I want 20% if I'm going to approve this for you, for the country. He said, would you make it 15? So we negotiate a little deal. On the Blackwell, I think he's coming to see me again about that. But that will be a unenhanced version of the big one.
We can talk about Blackwell in a moment, Congressman, because that would be a pretty major development. But just the H20 chip was off limits to China only weeks ago on national security grounds. The export controls were lifted after Jensen Huang met with Donald Trump. Now 15% of their sales will be going to the United States government. I'm trying to get my head around this because it appears unprecedented. Did Donald Trump just declare the national security of the United States has a price?
Yeah, he declared our national securities for sale. It's a disastrous dereliction of duty. You know, the first thing that the commander-in-chief and the president needs to do is to protect our country. And so when he basically says that our national securities for sale, that our crown jewels can be obtained through some kind of revenue sharing agreement with the United States government, that is a horrible sign to our adversaries. What are we going to do next? Sell aircraft carriers to the Chinese and the government takes a 20% cut? This is horrible. We should not be engaged in the sale of these H20 chips to the CCP. And the fact that he would even broach the topic of these Blackwell processors potentially being for sale to the Chinese means that they're salivating at the prospect of basically taking those chips, inserting them into their military systems, which would be used against us and our allies, friends, and partners in the Indo-Pacific, and then also used against various minorities in perpetration of human rights abuses. So this is a really, really dark day for our national security. Wow.
Well, do you know about this? Had you heard about the Blackwell, Congressman? Is NVIDIA working on a China-friendly version?
I don't know about this, and I think that there's going to be a lot of head scratching on Capitol Hill. I hope that my friends on the other side of the aisle are also as disturbed as I am. But we will introduce legislation at this point to require congressional approval of the sale of these highest end chips or high end chips to China, because quite frankly, the White House is not looking out for our best interests at this point as a country.
So have you written that bill, and would you get Republicans to sign on to it?
I would do everything in my power to get Republicans and Democrats to join this bill. We must say with one voice that our national security comes first. That's the purpose of export controls. They are not meant to somehow be used to bargain for other trade concessions. And yet we're now sending a signal to the Chinese that that's exactly what those export controls are subject to. And so I'm very, very concerned. Again, I hope that my Republican friends can prevail upon the White House to change course. But regardless, I think it's time to introduce legislation for congressional approval before these types of chips are sold going forward.
Will you file that bill when you get back to town?
Yeah, if not sooner.
Talk to us when you do. Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois making news this evening on Balance of Power. We thank you Coming up, President Trump and Russia's President Putin set to meet Friday. One of the other major stories we're following today. We'll talk about it with former Democratic Congresswoman Jane Harman. But first, President Trump says he will deploy the National Guard to the nation's capital. We'll bring you the details and the reality on the ground here in Washington next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs and homeless people, and we're not going to let it happen anymore. Washington, D.C. should be one of the safest, cleanest, and most beautiful cities anywhere in the world, and we're going to make it that. We're going to make it safe. We're going to make it smart. We're going to make it beautiful.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. President Trump there today on his decision to deploy 800 National Guard troops across our nation's capital, even invoking the Home Rule Act that allows him to temporarily assume control of the district's police department. The president's rhetoric today, however, runs counter to statistics from the Department of Justice just from January that found violent crime in Washington, D.C., in fact, was at a 30-year low. Data from the D.C. police painting a clearer picture. Total crime overall down 7% from this time last year. Joining us now with the latest on this, Bloomberg's Myles Miller. Myles, what else can we figure out from the data here as we try to get to the bottom of this?
Yeah, I mean, if you look just anecdotally at this, there have been some high-profile incidents in Washington. Capitol Hill staffer or an intern was shot at 7th Street, which is a major thoroughfare right by the convention center. And then you have, just a few days ago, a person affiliated with the Doge efforts, a federal government employee who was attacked, and that is being investigated. But what you have here is a takeover by the federal government of Washington, D.C. under the Home Rule Act. 800 National Guards members who will be doing mainly traffic and logistical support. But this is all going to be run by Pam Bondi, Attorney General, effectively going to be running this law enforcement effort. And then she'll be supported by Terry Cole, the new head of the DEA. So what does this mean for MPD, the local police department? It'll still be run by its chief, and they'll answer to the chief, but the chief will have to answer to Pam Bondi and answer to Terry Cole. This is unprecedented, and what we know is that this sort of follows the model that the president has done in other cities. I'm in L.A. right now. You know, he deployed the National Guard to L.A. after the immigration protests. But this move comes after Congress stripped $1 billion from D.C.'s budget. And D.C. says they need more cops. The president said, why do you need more than 3,000 cops? You can get it done. And he's going to try to do this with federal law enforcement as well.
Bloomberg's Myles Miller. Thank you for covering this for us, Myles. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser spoke to the media a short time after the president's announcement. Here's part of what she had to say.
We don't, and I think I speak for all Americans, we don't believe it's legal to use the American military against American citizens on American soil. I'm not a lawyer, and but I think that's a fairly widely held fact.
Joining us now for some context surrounding the president's announcement today is Michael Gerhardt, Distinguished Professor of Jurisprudence at UNC School of Law. It's great to have you with us here, Michael, as we seek a better understanding of what the president's rights are here, where his authority lies. Has he in any way abused the law around his authority? The mayor made clear today that under this Home Rule Act, the president can in fact determine what the emergency is that he is declaring.
I think he's abused his authority. You're right, under Section 740 of the Home Rule Act, the president does get some authority, but I'm not sure he gets to decide for himself what is an emergency. His rendition or version of the so-called facts or the crime in D.C. is quite contrary to what people who are officials in D.C. says about what is happening on the ground. This is not the first time that President Trump has sort of engaged in a sort of alternative version of the facts to suit his own purposes. He wants to have a distraction from the Epstein files. This is yet another attempt to do that, but he's doing it in a Democratic city in order to score political points with his base, and the facts are contrary to what he says.
Well, so has the president declared martial law over the capital city?
Not yet, but he's effectively trying to do that. There's no need for federal forces to step in. There is already a pretty good police force in place in D.C., and as the mayor and others have pointed out, crime is at an all-time low in D.C., which is really quite contrary to the president's assertion of an emergency that would allow him to take over. He only gets 48 hours to do that before he has to make a report on what the progress is that he's done. So so we're next waiting to see what kind of things he says. We have to hope at some point he'll be grounded in reality.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that is how we understand it as well. Under the Home Rule Act, the president can in fact federalize or take control of the local police department for 48 hours before having to reassert his authority. So are we going to be in a world where every 2 days the administration needs to make a phone call, declare an emergency, and take over the police?
Well, we could be. I think this is part of President Trump's playbook. Keep people off balance, distract from things he doesn't want them to look at, and try and turn Democrats into the enemy. But the people of D.C. deserve better, and their crime rate is lower, at an all-time low, as we've said. So according to the plain language of the Home Rule Act, the president doesn't have any legal authority to do what he's doing.
Really interesting. Michael, he did talk about other cities today, while he was talking with reporters at the White House, and he specifically called out Chicago and New York. We've already seen the president deploy National Guard troops in Los Angeles, as Myles reminded us a moment ago. But is that the end game, to duplicate this type of thing in other cities, or is Washington special as the federal city when it comes to his authority?
Well, the fact that he mentioned other cities suggests that his game plan is basically to go to try and cast Democratic cities as under siege in emergency circumstances. The facts are contrary to that. What I think the American people need, and what the law requires here, is facts that are true, that would guide the policy of the federal government in this instance. I think this is a play or a ploy, again, to put attention beyond, other than what the president wants attention on. He's still losing support in some circles because of the Epstein mess. And today he's trying yet again to divert attention.
Michael, it's good to have you. Mike Gerhardt, Distinguished Professor of Jurisprudence at UNC School of Law. Joining us now for more analysis here on the political side of this whole story, the president's announcement about the District of Columbia, Bloomberg politics contributor Adam Hodge, managing director at Bully Pulpit International and a Democratic strategist. Adam, it's great to have you. What's really going on here? The professor there mentioned Jeffrey Epstein's name at least twice. There are a lot of people asking why now that we have crime, according to the DOJ, in January at a 30-year low, why you would be mobilizing federal authorities and the National Guard. Is it as simple as obscuring from another story called Epstein?
Well, I'm going to do one thing first and actually give the president credit for one thing he said today. D.C. is one of the most beautiful capitals in the world. And as you pointed out at the beginning, this is Bloomberg, this is Stats Matter, it has historically low crime rate. Professor Gerhardt is right. This is all about distracting from the Jeffrey Epstein scandal that he has been dogging him all summer, followed him across the pond with the EU negotiations, and it's something he's trying to distract from here again. I think that's ultimately what's going on. And you could tell there was a little bit of even mixed messages when Kash Patel spoke at the White House and standing next to the president, got off script a little bit and talked about how DC's crime rate is down. So I think that tells you almost everything you need to know. The last thing I think is important to remember is that earlier this year, Republicans in the House, and Donald Trump signed it, a bill that's put DC's budget in limbo. And you heard the mayor repeatedly talk about how that was it hurting their ability to put cops on the street and to hire new cops in DC. So like we have a little bit of a tricky issue for the president here, where his actions also undermine the efforts he's made and what he announced today.
What does this mean for the politics of D.C.? I know a lot of people who are not from here have different thoughts, but this is a real city. Actual people and families are from here. People don't just work for the federal government. There are great neighborhoods with wonderful culture and history, and it's been a struggle for people. If you see the license plate in Washington, D.C., it says taxation without representation, without a congressional vote. There was, of course, Adam, a long time drive to get statehood status here in Washington, D.C. Now people are questioning whether home rule will survive this administration. What's your thought?
I think it's going to rally the city together. I think it may have the opposite effect of what the president is hoping for. I think the thing that Democrats have to be careful of, though, in this moment, is to not get sidetracked by the president. Like he's trying to throw, as the professor was saying, a lot of things into the air and hopefully distract. He has been dogged by the Epstein scandal all summer. And the big, beautiful bill that he's been trying to sell around the country that is historically unpopular, it's colluding with his base. And those effects are starting to hit for his voters, and it will over the next few months. And I think that's what they're trying to distract from. So I think we can't get caught chasing the shiny object, as Trump is often good at getting Democrats to do. Stay laser focused on the bills that we know are unpopular, and talk about the rising costs that may come from the tariffs that we'll see later this year.
Well, the fact is that we could have some interesting optics, right, in the days ahead, Adam. I'm assuming that the president wants to show something for this mobilization. I don't know if there's a bit of shock and awe coming here, or if we start seeing a lot of arrests on the streets. But if they're going after the citizens of Washington, D.C. without cause, if we start seeing video of that happening, is there a backlash potentially outside of this city politically for President Trump?
There might be. I mean, if D.C. today is a calm city, right? Yes, there's pockets of violence. It's a major city in America, but by all intents and purposes, it's a pretty calm city. If this has the impact of actually creating a lawlessness, nobody's calling for it. People should protest peacefully. I've said that before on Bloomberg. I will say it again. If you want to protest peacefully. But if this turns into an effort of urban chaos, that's on the president, because he's directly responsible for causing that chaos. Now, let's hope that doesn't happen. People should make their opinion clear in a peaceful, nonviolent way. But certainly, you would hate to see that happen. And if it does, there's only one person to blame, because it's pretty calm today. I walked around, took my kids to camp. Yeah. It was a pretty safe day and no issues. So, anything that happens from on here, again, is on the president.
Yeah, I was actually surprised the same. I didn't see any more cruisers or uniformed police than I normally would going through the district, and maybe that's about to change. The FBI apparently was deployed as of the end of last week, and we'll see if uniformed troops actually start showing up. Adam, thank you for joining us as ever. Adam Hodge, Bloomberg Politics contributor and managing director at Bully Pulpit International. Always appreciate the insights. Coming up on Balance of Power, President Trump set to meet Vladimir Putin this Friday in Alaska as part of a renewed bid to end the war in Ukraine. We're going to spend some time looking ahead to that summit with Jane Harman, the former Democratic Congresswoman from California, former ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, as we prepare for what could be the most important meeting of President Trump's presidency. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I'm going in to speak to Vladimir Putin, and I'm going to be telling him, you got to end this war, you got to end it. Now, I may leave and say, good luck, and that'll be the end. I may say this is not going to be settled. I'm going to meet with President Putin, and we're going to see what he has in mind. And if it's a fair deal, I'll reveal it to the European Union leaders and to the NATO leaders, and also to President Zelensky. I think out of respect, I'll call him first. At the end of that meeting, probably in the first 2 minutes, I'll know exactly whether or not a deal can be made.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. That was President Trump earlier today ahead of his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin this Friday in Alaska. If it goes ahead as planned, it will be their first summit during President Trump's second term and the first time Putin has been to the United States since 2015. Here with more on this, Bloomberg's Eric Martin. Eric, thanks for joining us. The president says he's pushing for Zelensky to be at the, quote, next meeting. I'm assuming that will have a lot to do with this meeting. So what can be accomplished on Friday?
Absolutely, Joe. Well, that's what everyone is asking. We're so used to seeing these scripted moments in politics where a U.S. president gets together with a foreign counterpart because they have a deal already prearranged and pre-negotiated to announce. These deliverables, as we talk about in Washington, if the president goes someplace, they want to have deliverables and things to roll out. And this is a meeting where we really don't know what the outcome is going to be. As President Trump said, he doesn't know what the outcome is going to be. And so seeing what that relationship is like with President Trump and President Putin seeing each other for the first time in years since 2019, and having the opportunity to deliver to him the message that he delivered publicly in the briefing room today, and then see where things are. But absolutely including in this discussion and representing and then downloading that his perceptions to the UK, France, Germany, Ukraine, to President Zelensky, to all of these other U.S. allies and partners, and everybody waiting to see what the result of that conversation is going to be.
Scant details on exactly where in Alaska this will take place, the facility. Do we have any idea how long these two will meet and what the conditions will be?
That's right. We still don't know. We're still in the dark as far as exactly how this is going to happen. But the historic nature to this is the first time that we will have a Russian president on U.S. soil in a decade since the UN meetings, General Assembly in 2015, the first bilateral meeting between a U.S. president and a Russian president since 1988, the famous Governor's Island photo of President Reagan leaving office, President George H.W. Bush coming in as president-elect, and Mikhail Gorbachev. And so really the historic nature of this summit is quite fascinating in and of itself.
That's for sure. We underscore the historic nature of what's going to take place Friday. We'll have a lot of coverage when that happens. Bloomberg's Eric Martin. Thank you, Eric. Joining us now for more insights into what might take place at this summit, Jane Harman, former Democratic Congresswoman from California, former ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Jane, it's great to see you. This is an interesting set of circumstances. Why is the United States the host nation for this summit?
Well, I think the only people who want to talk to Putin solo is President Trump, and it's on U.S. soil, and where it's on U.S. soil, because Putin can't go a lot of places. The ICC has declared him a war criminal, and we don't belong to the ICC, so he's welcome here, and he's not going over other countries to get to the United States. Remember, Sarah Palin once said she could see Russia from Alaska. Just pointing that out. But more seriously, in 1994,
not the first to say that today.
Yeah, I thought I'd throw it in. In 1994, Ukraine, the government of Ukraine, gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for an agreement to respect its sovereignty. Who was one of the parties to that agreement? His name is Vladimir Putin. He has violated every agreement he's made with Ukraine since. And so I don't think this is a guy coming into this meeting that I would put a lot of trust in. Plus, President Trump just said he'll know in the first 2 minutes whether there's something serious here. Putin has already said what he wants is basic victory, and his people think he's won. I mean, let's understand that the cutbacks in Voice of America and Radio Free Europe and all of those things have eliminated a huge source of information into Russia. So, Putin's coming into this feeling great. Where it goes, I think is nowhere. I don't see how Trump can.
The president described this.
Yeah, excuse me.
Sorry, Jane. The president described this as a feeling out kind of meeting, as opposed to something with, preconditions, with an agreement in place, with an agenda. And you know what the conventional wisdom here is, that this is already a win for Putin. The fact that he's got an invite to the USA to sit down with the American president, the optics behind all of that, is that just the cost of brokering peace?
I'm in total agreement with you. That's what I basically just said. I don't think this is the cost of brokering peace. I think this is the cost of being played again by Vladimir Putin. I mean, it is totally clear that the rest of the world thinks, and certainly I do, and I hope you do, that Russia was the aggressor here. Ukraine was there. I mean, starting in 2014, there's been Russian meddling, and the Donbass was interfering with the fair and free election in that year. I was an election observer with Madeleine Albright back then. But 11 years later, I mean, there's hot war, and it's been going on for almost 3 years, and nothing has come out of it except misery. And there's no way that Putin is going to get what he's asking for. There's no way Trump can give it to him. And Trump already knows what it is. So the much better approach to this would have been to talk to the victim here, Ukraine, and find out what their terms are, and then maybe bring Putin into the room and see how to settle it out. But there cannot be, given the history with Russia, any agreement that doesn't have some kind of a force along the border, the agreed to border, if there's a new border between Ukraine and Russia. It won't work because Putin will violate it again.
Well, I don't know what you make of this talk. In fact, I'm pretty sure I do know what you make of this talk of land swaps. It's unclear exactly what form that would take, Jane, but there is another plan. President Zelensky will not be at the table, it seems, on Friday, nor will any of our European allies, who, of course, have a lot to lose or gain, depending on the outcome here. An alternative plan was brought forth over the weekend from our European allies, with a joint statement that came from Emmanuel Macron, the Chancellor of Germany, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and others. A diplomatic end, it said, to this war must protect Ukraine and Europe's security interests. They're not going to buy what we're talking about here in terms of freezing the lines in place now. What are your European contacts telling you about this?
Well, protecting Europe requires making sure that Putin has no room to violate any agreement that Ukraine chooses to make. Let's understand, Ukraine has to make this agreement, not me, not you, and not Donald Trump. Ukraine has valiantly fought this war and is the country that's the victim. And if Putin gets away with this, he goes right into Europe. So Europe has equities too. That's why I'm saying that any agreement on borders, let's imagine existing pre-war borders, still will require some kind of a force along that border to make sure that Putin doesn't violate it. Welcoming Ukraine to NATO seems a non-starter at the moment, but a NATO force along that border sounds like a good idea to me, or certainly NATO countries along that border sounds like a good idea to me if there's going to be an agreement. And this war should stop. I mean, somebody was quipping that Trump's foreign policy is hates war, loves gold. Now, that's pretty funny, but he hates war. So, okay, he gets a win if this thing is done correctly. He's not going to get a win tomorrow. The guy who's going to get the win tomorrow is Vladimir Putin. Friday is Vladimir Putin.
I just wonder realistically what you see here for potential outcomes, including what the president said in that remark we played for you. He said, hey, good luck. We're pulling away from the table, even though we said we would end this in the first 24 hours. You've got a president at the negotiating table who's angling for a Nobel Peace Prize. Is it possible at this stage for President Zelensky to keep the Donbass and Crimea part of his country?
Well, let's let him decide that with help from most of us who think he has fought valiantly to protect his sovereignty. Let's see. I'm not saying the Donbass is gone. I mean, it is. The Donbass has been interfered with for 11 years by Russia, but still there was a fair and free election in 2014. I don't think it's gone. I don't think Crimea is gone. I think that Vladimir Putin is playing a weak hand brilliantly, and his people think he's won. And President Trump is playing right into that hand by saying, I'll know in the first 2 minutes what to do. This doesn't sound to me like any kind of effective diplomacy.
You think we get a bilateral news conference when it's done, or we have to figure out what happened in that meeting?
Well, we had one, a few years ago where he questioned the value of U.S. intelligence and said Russian intelligence was better. I'm saying that I don't see a win for President Trump in this meeting, and I see another distraction from other things that aren't working so well yet, like Israel and Gaza. I strongly disagree with President Netanyahu's strategy here. I think there are much better options. And President Trump could be much more helpful there. And guess what? There might be a Nobel Prize at the end of that one if it works out well. But I don't see it here. And one more funny thing. Where is the Nobel Prize? It's in Northern Europe. These are people who were being dissed by President Trump Friday when he meets with President Putin and shuts out Europe and Ukraine.
It's always great to have you, Jane. Jane Harman is former Democratic Congresswoman from California. I always appreciate your insights on Bloomberg. Coming up, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defending the plan Jane was just talking about to expand his military sweep in Gaza. We'll have details. Now we'll turn back to our conversation on the president's plan to deploy National Guard troops into D.C. when we assemble our political panel. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Some of the stories we're watching ahead of our political panel in today's Power Brief. Miguel Uribe Turbay, a Colombian senator and presidential hopeful, has died 2 months after being shot while campaigning in Bogota. His wife confirmed Uribe's death on social media earlier this morning, a senator since 2022 for the conservative Democratic Center Party. Uribe was shot in the head while speaking to supporters of his presidential bid in June. He had been in critical condition since. Police have detained at least 6 people, including a teen who was apprehended at the scene. The investigation is ongoing. Uribe was 39. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is visiting the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention today following the deadly attack on the Atlanta-based agency last week, according to people familiar with his plans. On Friday, a law enforcement officer died after the shooting near the main campus of the CDC. The suspected shooter died at the scene. Earlier, the gunman attempted to enter the CDC headquarters, but was stopped by security. He then drove to a pharmacy across the street and opened fire. The suspect's father told the Associated Press his son had become fixated with the COVID-19 vaccine. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is defending his plan for a military sweep against the remaining members of Hamas in Gaza, authorizing the advance on Gaza City on Friday, calling it the best available option for recovering hostages, while safeguarding his country's long-term security. Netanyahu defending the plan on Sunday despite vocal opposition both at home and abroad.
Our goal is not to occupy Gaza. Our goal is to free Gaza, free it from Hamas terrorists. The war can end tomorrow if Gaza, or rather if Hamas lays down its arms and releases all the remaining hostages.
And this morning, President Trump announcing plans to deploy hundreds of National Guard troops to the Capitol. And just hours later, Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser responded to that move. Here's what she said.
I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C.
We are American citizens. Our families go to war. We pay taxes and we uphold the responsibilities of citizenship. And while this action today is unsettling and unprecedented, I can't say that given some of the rhetoric of the past, that we're totally surprised.
Joining us now with their take on these stories here on Balance of Power, this evening's political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, our Republican strategist, and Democratic analyst Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Great to have you both in studio with us again today. Jeannie, I've heard a couple of things today about this whole story, largely that the president is within the bounds of his authority to do this, and also he's trying to distract the world from Jeffrey Epstein. Are both true?
I don't think we know. I think it is a great question, and that's the main question I have. Why is the president doing this now? Is it to distract from something, or is it to set groundwork for something to come? And we really don't know. What we do know is that his rhetoric and this dystopian narrative he has concocted does not match with either the numbers or many people in Washington, D.C.'s lived experience, having been in the city for the last several months, year, whatever it is. And so you have to ask, why is he doing this? And I think that's a big question that we still don't have an answer to.
Rick, you've lived around here for most of your life. You love Washington, I think, as much as we all do who live here. And you've seen the city go through a lot of changes following some pretty tough years in the 70s and 80s if you lived in downtown Washington, D.C. This is a very different place now. There's a lot of money, a lot of investment in the city, a much more diverse group of people who live here. What do you make of the timing? If, in fact, crime is at a 30-year low, as the DOJ tells us, what are we doing this for now?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of hard to tell, right? I think Jeannie summed up right. We don't know the motivation to do this because what he articulated today, which was rampant crime, high, murder rates, things like that, really don't fit with the history of what's going on in D.C. today. And so you have to assume that something else is motivating him. He does have the right to do it. I mean, the presidency has certain obligations to the city, and the city has certain obligations to the presidency. Again, it's the use of emergency powers based on a narrative of crime and that may or may not actually pan out. But he's willing to take that risk, right? He's willing to say, hey, look, prove me wrong, take me to court, but in the meantime, I've got, 15 federal agencies that are going to fan out all over the city, and he's already done it, right? Done. So at the end of the day, I think this is all part of a broader scheme. We see him deploying National Guard troops in L.A. He's threatening Chicago, Boston, other cities. I think that this is a broad campaign to brandish his law and order credentials. It's an easy thing for him to do, and he gets a big impact off of it.
Politically.
I don't think he's trying to distract people from anything else. I think he's trying to focus them on I'm fighting crime in our cities, all run by Democrats.
Fascinating. The pictures that he had put on Truth Social last week were apparently taken from his motorcade on the way to the golf course in Virginia, and he saw a number of homeless encampments, some filth on the streets. He took a picture of a gutter, for instance, that needed to be cleaned here. He specifically mentioned New York and Chicago in the news conference today. You've both alluded to this now. Should those two cities get ready for the same?
He said that it could be coming, and then he went on to say, well, heck, maybe the people there will clean up on their own, but if not, this could be coming. And I'm glad you mentioned the homeless issue, because this is one of the many unanswered questions here.
Where are they going to go, Jeannie?
Where do they go? The unhoused, you're talking about millions of people in this country, unfortunately, with mental illness, addiction, and other really, really horrifying conditions that are unhoused, and he's saying we're going to move you to where nobody seems to know. And we have a history in this country of when we federalize with troops domestically, it has not worked out too well in the past. And so this is concerning, and I think it's also for any true conservative Republican got to be concerning, because these are people who believe profoundly in liberty and freedom from big government. And yet we've got a president as a Republican who's putting federal troops on the streets.
Well, there's a live view of our streets right now. I think just a couple doors down from the Gucci store and the Tiffany store. I just point to that because I actually haven't seen it. I don't know about the two of you over the weekend. I didn't see a massive law enforcement. I also didn't run into any groups who needed to be rounded up or arrested. Is that what we're about to see? Does he need to make good with some shock and awe here?
I think, the Oval Office visit today of,
That's it.
Laying out the law on this is probably the shock and awe. I mean, look what happened in L.A., right? They were having riots. He sends in National Guards. There's a 48 hours of controversy around their presence, and by a week later, I mean, there was no news coming out of L.A. There were no riots coming out of L.A. And 3 weeks after that, the National Guard went home.
They were gone.
And it wasn't even a news story.
Is that what happens here?
You know, I think it's certainly a pattern that we should start getting used to. Yeah. And as the mayor articulated, it should surprise no one that the President of the United States is using the powers of his office to play these games.
Well, from the file of self-contradictions, there was another conversation today at the White House about marijuana. The president, to his credit, was asked about it. He didn't bring this up, but he did confirm that his administration is considering reclassifying cannabis. Here's what he said about that today.
We're looking at it. Some people like it. Some people hate it. Some people hate the whole concept of marijuana because if it does bad for the children, it does bad for people that are older than children. But we're looking at reclassification, and we'll make a determination over the next few weeks. Very complicated subject, the subject of marijuana. I've heard great things having to do with medical, and I've had bad things having to do with just about everything else.
I don't know. We did hear, by the way, a promise on the campaign that he would consider this and take another look at it. Does this run against the grain of what he's doing in Washington?
Yeah, and it's such a great point because that's exactly what the reporter had asked him. You know, you're taking all these steps which are unprecedented to clean up Washington, D.C. of criminals and people addicted to drugs, and yet you're also at the same time considering declassifying marijuana. Isn't that hypocritical of you? And that's when the president said, well, we're considering, we haven't made a decision. Yeah. And I think this is some of the pushback he's going to get if indeed they did decide to go that way, and we still don't know how they'll go on marijuana.
Apparently told a number of cannabis CEOs at a fundraiser recently that he was open to doing this. Does that mean it's going to happen?
Well, I think that you already articulated the key thing at a fundraiser.
Yeah, okay.
But maybe this will get a 90-day delay. I mean, it could be a taco trade, and we don't even know it yet.
Well, look, I don't know if this is real or not, but it moved stocks. Right, Tilray was up 17%, Kronos 14%, Canopy growth 19%. Are these investors going to be disappointed?
Yeah, except he might just go ahead and do it, and he'll have something else going on, and nobody will notice that he did it.
It's kind of out of character for him, isn't it? I mean, I know he wants to make good on a campaign promise and make some donors happy, but is this the Trump brand?
Well, I think they're sort of contradictory, and that's what he's maybe struggling with internally.
He doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke.
He doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke. He wants to present himself as law and order, and yet you are declassifying a drug. I mean, that's, something that he's going to have to contend with.
He's looking out for people older than children, he said. That would be, by the way,
us?
I think that might be us. I think it's 21 and up how that goes. Those would be the adults. Rick, by the end of the week, we're going to be talking about Donald Trump in Alaska with Vladimir Putin. Will that mean the end of this whole story of law enforcement from the federal government on the streets of D.C.?
Look, if you can keep up with all the news cycles in the course of a day that Donald Trump pushes out there. But I do think that turning the page to Friday, and this is real geopolitical impact around the world. And so different from, FBI agents walking the streets of D.C. shouldn't surprise anybody. This one is full of potential surprises, right? What is the kind of a deal that Vladimir Putin will say yes to? Because that's clearly where Donald Trump is headed. I don't think it's in Donald Trump's mind to come out of Alaska without some kind of a deal on the table. Wow. But what you're willing to settle for, without the Ukrainians involved, is anybody's guess.
We're going to find out together on Friday. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, thank you so much for the analysis, and we'll meet you on Friday right here on Balance of Power. In the meantime, check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online. Thanks for joining us, as always, on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.